Yep.
Should I start?
So with that, we'll turn it over to Osama.
All right, thank you. Hi, I'm Osama. I am a postdoc at Cornell and here presenting the work I just started. This is co-authored with Ariel Ortiz-Babi of Cornell University and Jennifer Rift of Kansas State University. And this paper is looking at the impact of extreme weather, particularly extreme temperature, on farmers' finances in the state of Kansas. So as of now, like most of the literature on climate change impacts, which is looking on the agricultural sector, has primarily been focusing on yields, particularly like whatever output is being produced. We know that agriculture, due to its nature, is very vulnerable to climate shocks. We know that climate change is already taking place because of these natural disasters, flooding, hurricanes, heat waves. And we also know that farmers are getting impacted, but at least in terms of their yields. But what we currently do not know is if the impacts on yields are they translating into farm finances or not. So yield is an output story. We know what is being produced by the farm, but what about the inputs and other aspects which are a more proximate cause of farmers' welfare? For example, inputs might change more or they might not change as a result of climate change, and as a result, the income of farmers or the other financial aspects of farmers, they might or might not change. So we do not have full knowledge of the finance part. And this information is important in itself for farmers, but also for farm lenders, because they would want to know how much is the impact on their finances rather than just on the yield, because they would need that information in order to make their lending decisions. So our study have kind of three broad questions. The first, we would start by looking at the impact of extreme weather shocks on short-term financial measures. Then we would also look a little bit on the role of irrigation in buffering that impact. And last, we would look at if these short-term changes capitalize into something long-term. So the current literature, as I was just mentioning, can be broadly divided into two major parts. First is the yield impacts of the climate change. There are earlier papers which have suggested that there is a threshold level after which yield starts to go down. There is a threshold level of temperature around 30 degrees Celsius, after which we see a decline in crop yields. Then there are papers which move beyond yields and also include some input, like the inputs to farmers, thus looking at agricultural productivity. They've also suggested that there has been a decline in agricultural productivity growth globally. And then there is this other part. There are a few papers which are looking at some of the finances, but there is no, I would say, conclusive evidence yet. Primarily because all of these existing papers are based on aggregate data, particularly county level data. So we have like county level farm financial measures, county level yield measures. Also, these papers kind of rely on like census data, which takes place every 5 years or so. So we do not have information for every year, and like that is sort of important in like climate context, because a major climate event might take place in a particular year, which is not present there in the census. So there is a need for more disaggregated data, like below the county level, and also a data of higher temporal frequency. So we are using this KFMA farm level data. This is data collected by Kansas Farm Management Association. their member farmers. It's the data of it's a panel data of farmers in the state of Kansas. They have been tracking farmers since late 1970s. And we use the data from 1981 onwards because our temperature data starts from there. We have around 72,000 farm year observations in the panel that we use. This data has information about their production, about their finances, and it is disaggregated at the farm level. And like same farmers are being tracked over time. So the first category of variables that we are interested in looking at from this data are some key short-term financial metrics, primarily gross farm income, net farm income, government payments, and crop insurance. Then we would be looking at the role of irrigation in buffering any impacts of climate change on these financial measures. And like the two key variables that we will use from the data are number one, it's the proportion of cropland of each farm that is irrigated. So I create a dummy variable from that, and the second one is about irrigation related expenses. So we will see if climate shocks impact any of the irrigation related expenses. Last, in order to look at long-term impacts of climate change on these farm finances, we also construct some long-run measures over 20 and 30-year period, particularly looking at the growth rate of real farmland values and real farm equity values. And our weather data comes from PRISM, which starts observations from 1981. It's pretty high resolution at 4 kilometers. We start by computing temperature through the number of by creating temperature bins that are the number of days that are spent in each degree Celsius for each year during the growing season, which is defined from April to September. Then we aggregate this temperature bins data to county level for all counties in the state of Kansas, and we weight this by county's cropland areas. So the pixels that have more cropland, they are giving more weightage when we construct this temperature data. And our key measure of extreme temperature is what we call degree days, or what the literature called degree days. And we selected a threshold temperature that is 32 degrees Celsius because this is what the literature shows, and also our some preliminary evidence shows that after 32 degrees Celsius, crop yield starts to go down. So we would expect that this would kind of define our extreme temperature variable. So degree days is a concept that is kind of similar to, so the extreme degree days is like similar to growing degree days, where temperatures above a threshold are weighted with respect to their distance from the threshold. So for each day we calculate that what was the temperature, and if it was above 32, we would like weight it more if it was like way greater than 32 as compared to if it was like near 32. So like greater temperatures would get so the days having greater temperature would get more weightage. So we would like add all these degree day values in the growing season to get a measure of extreme degree day at a GR level, at a county GR level. So this is just a map showing how our extreme degree day measure evolves over the past 4 decades at county level, where it can be seen that in the past 3 decades, more and more counties are getting a greater number of extreme degree days. So our first basic model. This is studying the impact of extreme degree days, which is this EDD, on short-term measures of farm finances. Our Y variable, the farm financial measures are the gross farm income, net farm income, crop insurance, and government payments, and we use the inverse hyperbolic sign of these measures, which is an alternative of using log, because all of these are in dollar terms, and we wanted to take log, and like because of the zeros and negative values, we took this inverse hyperbolic sign. Then EDD is the extreme degree day measure, which is defined at county and year level. Then we also control for precipitation, and we have year fixed effect as well as farm fixed effects. Then, in order to explore the role of irrigation in buffering any impacts of extreme temperature on these farm finances, we use this model where we include in the same equation, we have an interaction term of extreme degree days and a binary variable of irrigation, which indicates that whether a farm is highly irrigated or not. And this just means that whether a farm's proportion of irrigated land is greater than the sample average or not. So if it is greater than the sample average, this dummy would take value 1, otherwise 0. And last, we do in order to study long-term impact of climate change, we limit sample to farms which have a panel length of at least 20 and 30 years. So these are just kind of two arbitrary definitions of long-term that we constructed from our data, because we have around like 40 years of data. So we limited our sample to only those farms which are being traced for 20 or 30 years. And then we constructed over this period, number one, we constructed the average yearly growth rate of real land values over this period, as well as the average growth rate of extreme degree days over this same period. And this is a cross-sectional regression looking at long-term changes. And we include association fixed effects in this. Associations are just divisions created by KFMA to like group counties. They have 6 associations within the state of Kansas, grouping similar counties together. So the first result was to just make sure that our extreme degree day variable is in line with the existing literature. We have crop yields as our Y variable, and there is a definite decline in the yields of corn, soybeans, and sorghum with each additional extreme degree day. Then, in terms of for our short-term financial measures, what we see is for the gross farm income and net farm income, there is a significant negative impact. And the impact on net farm income is much larger than the impact on gross farm income, which suggests that extreme temperature is probably impacting the input costs or the expenses. That's why the net farm income is being hit more than the gross farm income. And then the second takeaway from this table is the crop insurance variable, which also shows that extreme temperature, when there is an extreme temperature shocks, the crop insurance payments that the farms receive, they also go up. And what we find is that crop insurance buffers around 40% of the net farm income loss caused by extreme temperature. So when I take like sample averages and convert these into dollar terms, this is the number that I was getting. So the buffering that is happening due to crop insurance, that is around 40% of the loss that is caused by net farm income. To explore the role of irrigation, this is our key variable where we interact the extreme degree day measure with the irrigation dummy, we don't really see any impact on net farm income. We see some impact, some buffering impact on gross farm income, but not on any of the other variables. So what this is probably suggesting is that irrigation does help in terms of buffering any impact on output, but probably at the same time, irrigation is a costly activity, and the cost goes up when you have to use irrigation, and as a result, any buffering that could have happened is kind of offset by an increase of cost due to irrigation cost going up. Okay. Yeah, so we also looked at the role of irrigation when it comes to crop yields, and what we found is that there definitely is buffering impact of irrigation on crop yield. So this is going in line with our previous story, which is showing that irrigation would buffer impact on output, but probably not on inputs due to the cost. So we do have one key cost variable related to energy, which kind of supports the previous table, where the Y variable is just the irrigation related energy expense. And we see that this interaction term is positive and significant, which shows that in times of extreme temperature, the areas that are highly irrigated, their energy expense goes up. So these past 3-4 tables kind of add up the story of irrigation, that during extreme temperature, irrigation would probably help the output and yields, but not the net farm income, probably because of irrigation related costs going up. The last key result of our paper is on the long-term impact of extreme temperature on land values and farm equity. So these are cross sections over 20 and 30 years, and what we see is that there is the first column and the second column is of land values of 20 and 30 years, and then of farm equity over 20 and 30 years. And they all are showing a negative significant effect. And the key takeaway is that once we did some back of the envelope calculation, is that over a 30-year period, this extreme degree day is causing a reduction in the land value growth rate of around 9%. So the growth rate in land values have been slowed down by 9% over a period of 30 years due to this extreme temperature. And it's a similar case with like farm wealth or farm equity. Yeah, so just to summarize the paper and its findings, we used the KFMA farm level panel for Kansas, having around 72,000 farm year observations, and we linked it with the temperature, prism temperature data, which is at the county year level. We kind of did two main models. One is the short run, in which we use farm and year fixed effect, and we exploit variation over time and over space. And then we have the long run model, in which we exploit long run variations over 20 and 30 years, but in a cross-sectional sense. And the key takeaways are that extreme temperature decrease net income more than gross income, probably pointing towards something happening in the cost part. And second, crop insurance seems to buffer the negative impact of extreme temperature, but irrigation does not, primarily because irrigation is a costly thing, and when the cost goes up, so that kind of balances out any potential positive impact. And last is that over long term, extreme temperature slows down growth in in farmland values and farm equity. So yeah, this is all. Yep.
Thank you so much. This was really great. Rich results from the question. I was wondering how you think about, or have you looked at sort of profile of farms that are still operating over 20 or 30 years compared to the rest of the sample, and how you think about those results in the context of that being a sample essentially of survivors, how that might influence.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, I'm not really sure if the KFMA like only like sample farms over a longer period of time only if like they are present. I mean, there might be other farms that are of the same length, but like KFMA might not have like followed them over time. So I'm not exactly sure that if the sample that we're getting is like a true representative of like only farms that have survived over long. Yeah, but yeah.
Question about your irrigation measure. Why make it binary? Why not just use the proportion?
Yeah, I tried that. Yeah, I did that as well, and I think the results were like similar. I also did some other binary, like taking the median.
Well, you could say, we add, we make 10% more of this farm irrigated. And we can interpret, that.
Yeah.
We can't, because it's all sort of relative to this average level of irrigation that some, over some.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I also tried a few of the specifications, like the continuous proportion, and the results were like similar. So I just wanted to throw in just like one simple result. So yeah, but yeah, that makes sense.
So my question is, do you think the results would be really kind of varies by the market conditions? Like if you have a different commodity prices that varies over time, and also have the basis varies over space, and then you have different energy prices. So your conclusion about the impact of the shrinkage on the net farm income really depends on those factors, right? So you are showing an average, but it actually could be different across the year, right? And then by space, right? By different countries. Because your net income is equation is price times the yield and the minus the
cost.
And if the P is different, then your result will be different. Right?
So you mean if the P is different in different counties?
I mean, if the commodity price is like last year, like Israeli, I believe farmers will benefit from even their water extremely, they will benefit by irrigating because price is so good. But if they are like 4 to 5 years ago and commodity price is very low, then they may not benefit from irrigating their water like extremely.
Okay, so like if I'm able to understand, like, are you saying that if the prices are kind of different in different counties
And different years.
in different years? Yeah, and I think like that is like captured in the model, because it's like they are real prices that we are talking about. And
So I'm suggesting like the results will be very different depending on what kind of market prices you are in right now. So that's just my kind of I wonder if you have a result by year.
So you mean like dividing the sample in like nearer years and
commodity price period and low commodity price period. I mean, I think have that sample.
Okay.
Yes, and then we'll have 2021 and something like that. So I mean,
All right. Yeah.
Heterogeneity behind your algorithm.
Okay. Makes sense.
We have time for one more question, then keep moving.
Yes.
Just wondering if you have information on disaster payments received by the people in the survey.
No, we have like a variable for government payments, and it's kind of like aggregate but for some reason, we didn't really see any impact on government payments, even of like lagged temperature shocks. Yeah.
You might, look at disaster declaration years. If
Mhm.
you wanted to isolate some things, I mean, those are declared, by, the governor. So, you know, like,
Okay.
even if you can't disentangle it, you might have
Mhm.
a shock that maybe some of that income was actually
Disaster
received
payment.
on behalf of, not by crop insurance, but from a disaster declaration. There's another account there, right? There's the, you know, are their profits going down? Well, are their profits going down because they're getting an influx of money from the federal government? I think that's an important part of the story that you might want to tell.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. Will do.
Thanks, Osama.
Right, if you want to come in and have a seat, that would be great. I'll just get things queued up here. Oh. Okay. Yes. All right, and let me just get the screen sharing going again. Okay, am I okay?
You're good.
There, all right. All right, thank you for all making it down to the basement here. Yeah, and to the bitter end of AAEA. I appreciate everyone coming. So this is joint work with my colleague Nick Paulson and a former graduate student from Illinois, Becky Tsai, looking at commodity storage and the cost of capital. And this paper is really kind of at the intersection of commodity marketing and ag finance, testing a long held and I think pretty widely accepted aspect of the theory of commodity storage that really has never been sort of looked at it's really important, sort of the micro foundations of sort of why we think people store and how do we get to this really important number, which is, you know, say is inventory is a really important number for commodity prices. We never sort of tested this aspect of the theory. So that's kind of the idea here. And again, we're going to use sort of very similar data to the data that we saw in the last paper, but in the state of Illinois. Sort of broad motivation here is looking at sort of who stores agricultural commodities. And we have sort of a theory that kind of guides, okay, well, how is that storage decision made? Basically, a farmer or, you know, a firm is going to look at the spot price relative to the futures price. And if the cost of storage is less than that difference, then they're going to store. So there's no arbitrage condition here that is a little bit small, but hopefully you can see that basically says if the future, we're going to store up until the point where the futures price equals the spot price plus an opportunity cost of storage, which is related to that interest rate R and physical storage costs. And so we would think then the prediction from that no arbitrage condition is that storers are the firms that have the lowest per unit physical costs and the lowest per unit opportunity costs. And so why do firms like Cargill own large storage facilities? Well, they've built those facilities, they're relatively efficient, so they have low physical storage costs, but also they have access to relatively low cost capital. So conceivably Cargill can borrow at a rate lower than, you know, a small farmer in rural Illinois. And so they're going to do more of the storage, but we have never really looked at a sort of across firms, those kinds of differences in cost of capital. So that's what we're going to look at right now. However, in practice, we know that sort of this like economic motive for storage, sort of looking at comparing sort of current and expected future prices is not the only reason that a firm might store. So farms use storage for reasons other than sort of earning an expected profit, right? They might use storage facilities to facilitate harvest progress. So I can't deliver all the grain that I'm going to harvest right at harvest. I have to just store some just so that I can, you know, go through the process of harvesting. Merchants are similarly using storage just because the grain has to sit somewhere as it moves from wherever it's located. So if it's in somewhere in rural Illinois and we want to get it to China, we have to store it along the way as we move it from a farm in Illinois over to China. So there may be sort of non-economic motives, and maybe this theory doesn't sort of really govern the cross-firm differences that we see in storage. So we're going to look at, do firm level capital costs affect storage decisions? This is a key piece of the theory of storage, going back to Holbrook working. But there's really little empirical firm level evidence. We're going to look at Illinois grain farms from 2003 to 2020 from our Illinois Farm Business Farm Management data set, which is kind of has aspects that are very similar to the KFMA data. It is a, not perfectly representative, but a pretty good sample of grain farms in the state of Illinois. And we do find that there is a pretty significant relationship between capital costs and the proportion of production and inventory. So firms with higher cost of capital store less. But there is some very interesting heterogeneity in the effect that we estimate. And the big takeaway here is that we find that there's a subset of farms that are really unresponsive to sort of their storage behavior is very unresponsive to their financial situation. And we'll talk about some reasons why that might be the case. So we're going to use the weighted average cost of capital as our measure of the firm's opportunity cost of holding inventory. So the idea here is that firms can essentially sort of finance inventory by some unobservable combination of short run and long run debt or equity. So we have those basic weighted average cost of capital calculation has sort of 4 components. We can think of these equity and debt to asset ratios as kind of weights that weight different interest rates. So if a firm has a lot of short run equity, they have a lot of working capital, that first term is going to be weighted relatively high. And we think that that working capital has sort of the lowest opportunity cost relative to, say, taking equity that's held in the form of, say, land, and using that that equity is hard to use and it's very expensive. So there's a pecking order theory of capital structure that suggests that short run equity has the lowest cost of capital, then short run debt, long run equity. And this helps us because really we have little variation in actual interest rates. We also don't observe the interest rates that farms pay on debt in the FBFM data. And we probably don't have a lot of variation there anyways, relative to variations in capital structure. So we got more variation in capital structure in the cross-section of grain farms, and we think that then that's probably driving differences in storage behavior. Okay, how do we measure how much firms are storing? We're going to look at inventory as a share of production. So we know that all farms are different. Firms probably, farm firms are not in the business of going out and buying grain from others so they can store it, but they are making storage decisions about their own production. So we're going to look at inventory relative to the farm's production in a given year. Our inventory measure is basically taken from the firm's financial statements. So this is the bushels of corn or soybeans held as of December 31st. Here. So shortly after harvest, how much grain is the firm sitting on? How much sits on their financial statements, and then what was their production in that year? Normalizing by production helps us to just get rid of differences in farm size. So we're not we're agnostic to sort of how big the farm is, and also commodity characteristics that, so corn is bulkier than soybeans, so we have way more bushels. So we're going to just sort of get rid of that. Now we can compare sort of storage, or at least make comparable storage decisions about corn and storage decisions about beans. The interesting thing that we find when we look at this inventory share measure is that for farms in our FBFM data set, this clusters at 1. So which is the firm essentially storing all of their calendar year production as of December 31st. That doesn't necessarily mean it sits on a bin in their farm, but it's sitting on their financial statements. They have that listed as inventory. So for about 40% of the farms hold exactly that amount. There's a little tail here to the right-hand side of these graphs firms that hold more than their current year production in inventory, that's sort of harder to kind of like reconcile. And then a set of firms, close to sort of that other maybe 50 to 55% that are holding somewhere between 0 and 100% and not quite 100% of production in inventory. That just seeing that was very interesting to us when we started this work. We also find that those inventory shares are really stable over time. So this is sort of a transition probability matrix to say, if you were storing X% of your bushels of your production at year end, last year, how much did you store the next year? That 100% group is remarkably stable over time. So if you're one of those farms that's storing 100% of production in inventory as of December 1, you keep doing it year after year after year. There's some good reasons why that's true, but that you can see that transition probability for the 100% group is about 2/3. So if 2/3 of the farms, if you had 100% in inventory last year, you do it again, and that's not really true for any of the other groups when we're just sort of binning those inventory shares. So what we're going to do is put this into a sort of standard panel data framework where we're going to have farm and crop commodity fixed effects and year fixed effects. We're also going to look at off-farm income. We do have measures of that, so we can sort of think of, well, if maybe our farm financial measures are sort of that weighted average cost of capital calculation isn't capturing the firm's true opportunity cost of storage because I have a bunch of off-farm income. So maybe I can sort of, the opportunity cost might be lower for me if I have a lot of off-farm income. So we do control for that. A lot of the other stuff that we think might sort of affect storage decisions is going to be picked up in those farm and crop and year fixed effects. Identification here is really saying that like variation in that weighted average cost of capital is related to interactions between sort of market level interest rate changes and farm level capital structure that's relatively fixed, so that it's not the case that inventory decisions are sort of feeding back into decisions about capital structure, that those capital structure decisions are either driven by exogenous stuff that's exogenous to the farm, market rate changes, or things that are relatively long-lived, those capital structure decisions. We do have one alternative, and I won't present the results for that here, but we could also try and isolate exogenous shocks in capital structure using some instrumental variable, some sort of thing that we know is exogenous that's going to shock, say, the firm's working capital. So if you think about something like MFP payments come along and they are a big exogenous shock to working capital, and maybe that helps, maybe that changes firm storage decisions. And so that there's sort of some evidence to suggest that that might be the case. Some work that Nate Kaufman's done at the Casey Fed. I'm not going to talk too much about that here. We'll go straight to the results. So I will be hopefully well within my allotted time. So this just shows our estimated effect of, differences in weighted average cost of capital across firms and across time on inventory as a share of production. That is remarkably stable across these different specifications when we include different fixed effects. So the preferred specification there at the end is year and farm by crop fixed effects. We could also do year by crop and farm fixed effects. If you thought that there was sort of year and commodity specific things, so like there was something specific about soybeans in a given year that wasn't true of corn, we could do that too. But we basically show that if we increase weighted average cost of capital by 1%, we're going to get about a 4% decline in the average share of production in inventory. So that's so one question is sort of like whether that is like a large effect or not. Is that economically significant? In some sense, like, is it, how common is it that we see sort of a 1% change in weighted average cost of capital? Or like we see it, you see that sort of more across firms than across time. So it's hard to think of like, well, what would it take to get a 1% shock to the weighted average cost of capital? Could you see something where you might see like really large effects, like that would take a farm from say storing half of their grain to a quarter or something like that? That would take a big shock to capital costs to do that. The other thing that we do is estimate the same sort of panel data model with that fixed effects specification by quintiles or quantiles, excuse me. So we're going to do that for 10 quantiles from 10 to 90. And we find that effect varies a lot across that distribution of inventory shares. So remember, we saw there's that big group, that 40% that store essentially all of their production. We find that group is almost wholly unresponsive to differences in capital costs. So if you're in that group that stores everything, it doesn't matter whether you have a lot of working capital or none. You sort of engage, your storage behavior doesn't differ a lot. And the effect size gets a lot larger when we're down in those groups that have fluctuating levels of storage across time and firms. So there's sort of like these two, it seems like these two groups that have very different storage behavior. So why do we find what we find? Sort of the big candidate explanation that we have for why some firms are kind of unresponsive to economic incentives to store is related to deferred income tax obligations. So we know that a lot of farms time grain sales for taxation reasons. We know that farmers wait until after year end so they can move that revenue to the next tax year. And once you start doing that, you have to kind of keep doing that. And that's what generates that group that stores all of their production every year, because if they don't, right, they create a large tax liability in a given calendar year. And there's actually some very old work by Davenport, Bolge, and Martin as an ERS report from the early 80s that talks about this, deferred income tax treadmill. So if we, one solution to this that will never ever happen, right, is like we take farms off of cash accounting and we get everyone to sort of be a little bit more economically responsive, because now we can't play these income tax games. Obviously that's never going to happen. But we could think about it as a sort of thought experiment. And then the other sort of discussion question we have is sort of like, is that sort of approximately 4% change in the share of production and inventory, is that economically significant? It's statistically significant. But it's really sort of the thought experiment there is like, how common is a shock of that magnitude? We need to do a little bit more work to sort of understand, at the farm level, what kinds of shocks to capital costs do we see? So with that, I'll open it to questions. Papers.
Really interesting looking at that part.
That distribution.
The distribution really. I think it's just so much on risk preferences on
Okay.
farmer that they're going, the ones that wants the most degrees of freedom, like most flexibility that they can market when they want. They don't want to be in a line at the co-op for an hour when they don't have enough labor as it is to haul.
Right. So it's,
And you don't know if it's on farm.
I don't know. It's just sort of like, is that sitting as an inventory item? Like we know sort of, we break down, it's not just inventories is not just like a dollar number on their balance sheet. We do know the specific number of bushels, but it's just that on that year and date, how many bushels of corn are going into that inventory number.
And then I guess, how did you estimate your cost of equity?
So we use, sorry, and that's something that's missing from here. So in that weighted average cost of capital calculation, we use essentially like a long run sort of like return on equity. So this is like, current returns and then like long run land appreciation, those two things.
Is there much cross-sectional?
So there's no cross-sectional variation in that. So I'm using one number for all the farms to say that's everyone's long run expectation of,
So
returns to equity.
coming from the leverage.
It's all coming from capital structure. Yeah, I mean, that's where our variation's coming from. There's variation across time, but that's common across.
There could be
Across.
something about their access to capital too, to a certain extent, because the higher leverage firms. I don't know, that was,
Yeah,
it's all coming from the change in leverage across firms. And then if you want an interesting case study, look at the ratio across Iowa and see who had to you know, did they go back and put in the stories that got wiped out?
there you go. Yeah. No, that's a good one. Now it would really be ideal is if we could have had that derecho just go through Illinois a little bit more, so then I don't have to look at different farms. I kid.
Farm got like 80% wiped out.
Yeah.
Maybe one more question.
So I think to piggyback on Bruce said, I've had conversations with my family that so-and-so always sells their grain in harvest, always.
Yes. I mean, yes, like
If
we
they
know that
all
this
do
behavior.
quality things, I do the same thing every year.
So but you think it's behavioral as opposed to like, there's some other
I
like,
mean, I mean, personality almost, I don't quite know the exact right, but it.
Yeah, I don't
how
have-
can I
yeah.
put it at this point?
Yeah.
But with that, I've heard that a lot.
yeah.
The other one is depreciation,
So what about depreciation?
green bins depreciate.
Okay. Oh, yes. So grain bins depreciate. And so people with depreciated bins have sort of a lower,
No,
like,
it's tax benefit,
okay,
and if you have a lot of cash on hand, that.
interesting. I'll have to think.
This isn't just on farm storage, it's adult. It could be anywhere.
Oh,
Yeah, it could be on
okay,
farm.
okay.
I mean, now one would think that, yeah, the farms that have a lot of on-farm storage are the ones possibly doing a lot of that, but I don't have information on, you know, how much on-farm storage these farms have. I don't think. But I wish I did. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we'll get to our last presentation. Oh, and when I close that window.
It's still there, hopefully. Yeah, I moved my stuff, so. Okay. We'll get there. Hopefully I'm sharing. I think it says I am. Don't tell me it does this. We'll do it this way in terms of, it's kind of a pain with, and maybe it's going to work. Essentially what we're looking at is essentially a couple things. Section 179 bonus depreciation, machinery investment. One of the things people are concerned about is whether or not these accelerated depreciation methods put farmers in trouble. And so that's one of the things we're looking at. The other thing we're going to be able to pull out of here is basically just the relationship between income and investment. And where this can be pretty important is if you're a machinery producer or dealer and you're looking at net farm income, what percentage of that is going to move off the market. And so that's kind of what we're going to do. In terms of, I won't spend much time on this, but essentially you have the goals there. This is kind of a unique data set, and it is KFMA data, but one of the things that causes KFMA members to join is the tax benefits in terms of essentially they get their taxes done. And the range of subscription fees is probably about 500 to about 5,500, depending on the size of the farm, the complexity, those types of things. But with that, we have to track every asset. And so essentially we have every asset in terms of when it was brought on, when it was sold. And so this is a very rich data set. It's very complex in terms of, for example, 2014 to 2021. Essentially, just in that 4-year or 8-year period, you had 1.6 million assets. And some of those, for example, may be in the data set every year. They may be in once. And so there's all kinds of things you could do there in terms of looking at things like, okay, how fast do they turn assets? Because you have the acquisition, you have the disposition, you have assets. What we're going to do here is we're just going to look at those that went into service in that 2014 to 21 period. In terms of essentially all kinds of tax code type things, and Bailey did this for her thesis. In terms of with the general depreciation system, straight line, double declining balance, 1.5 declining balance. Right now, we're more on the straight line with the section 179. And so you have a lot of changing depreciation methods through this system. In terms of essentially, there's a whole section of the IRS tax code, the section 179. The goal of this is essentially to provide small and medium-sized businesses to reduce the cost of investment in asset purchases. It allows the deduction of the full purchase price the year you put it into service, subject to certain conditions. The thing is Congress likes messing with this over time in terms of essentially, this is a good thing where people like to lobby. At one point in time, essentially, you had to have profit in order to take 179. And so there's all types of things going on there. In terms of, there's a deduction limit, and this is the maximum per year, and this changes from year to year. An equipment purchase limit, that says how much you can essentially invest in a specific year. Believe it or not, that changes from year to year. And I'm wondering if I'm not putting these slides for our individual there, but bonus depreciation also is there. Again, this in some respects is not always available. It is claimed within the first years of the asset use. Originally, it was just to new assets. Now it's applied to used assets, and so new to the producer. And so again, lots of stuff there with regards to what's going on. Again, it's used to accelerate depreciation over time. And now, how do I get it to change that slide? There we go. It's generally thought that bonus depreciation will be used after section 179 depreciation. The big thing though with bonus depreciation, which is different than section 179, section 79, you have to have a profit in order to use it. With bonus depreciation, you can actually have a loss and then you can carry that loss forward. And so again, there's differences in terms of how these are set up. Bonus depreciation is probably more useful for larger operations, especially those that spend. And Bailey did a great job when she was doing her thesis, going through and actually reading all these different tax codes and changes and stuff like that. And so this is in the paper, but it kind of has, for example, the different limits, bonus depreciation. And so the Economic Stimulus Act of 2008, 250,000 deduction. Essentially, you can purchase up to 800,000, and bonus depreciation, you do 50%. You can see they like doing these every year. 2009, essentially, not a lot of change in those. 2010 Act, they eliminated bonus depreciation. Another 2010 Act, there they increased the amount of purchases you could do up to 2 million and still qualify. Tax relief of 2010, all kinds of applications there in 2010. 2012, 500,000, essentially 2 million, 50%. Tax extenders bill of 2014, 52 million, 50%. And so you can see those if you want to kind of look at them from a graphical perspective. Again, the purple is kind of the deduction limit. It's up to over 1 million now, in that this is increasing by a CPI measure or a inflator measure each year. The bonus depreciation, that kind of has the percentages. And so you can see that that's jumped from 0 to 50 to 100, down 50. It's up through 100 through 2021. And then the equipment purchase limit, it's actually up to 2.5 million. And so what this says is on section 179, if you purchase 3 million, then no longer is section 179 available to you. And so again, you can see that Congress, and the purple line there is basically the tax policies that are involved with when we're working with this data. And so some of the key variables we pulled out was the cost basis, the section 179 depreciation, the bonus depreciation. Again, we have the year that this is put in. In terms of essentially, we have two data sets that are continuous. One is where we have the tax records all the way through, and the other is where we have complete financial information of quality that we trust the income statements over the time. And so we have 743 farms that we have the tax records that are in the data set in each of those 8 years. Essentially, their average annual investment was 192,000. Those that we have in every year, the 416, their average investment was 127,000. And again, that's going to move from year to year. But the sample that we do the financial analysis with tends to be a little bit smaller than the farms that we're looking at. In terms of looking at this, you can see we have the ability to divide these out by assets. And so we could look at grain storage, we could look at all kinds of things. And this is one of the things that's unique about this set, is that typically you just have the total investment and you don't have the ability to break it out by line. And I think that's kind of interesting with regards to this. One of the things you look at this is you would think that combines and tractors would be a huge percent of the total investment. But again, these are not stacked, but essentially if you look at it, essentially they're both less than 50. And so they would only get up to 100. And then you have the purple line that is all the assets. And so Bailey wanted to graduate, and so we only made her do combines and tractors in terms of, we'll have some other poor graduate student do hay equipment or all other types of equipment on the farm. In terms of this kind of looks at with regards to the section 179 and the bonus depreciation. Couple things here in terms of this color scheme is the same. And so the solid lines are the section 179, the bonus. Big thing is bonus basically wasn't there until after the Trump tax bill passed. And so basically farmers did not use bonus depreciation much at all. If you look at that purple line, basically at 2017, that was virtually zero. And then that popped up 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. And so bonus depreciation is much more important over the last 4 years under the Trump tax changes that he put in. And so it'll be interesting to see whether or not Congress adjusts that bonus depreciation one way or the other in where changes are. But if you look, for example, at all assets under section 179, it looks like it became less important, but kind of what's going on there is simply income. In terms of 2014, 2015, the income started falling. 2016 was a real poor year in Kansas. Net farm income of $11,000. And so hopefully you're not having farmers going out and buying lots of capital equipment when they have a net farm income of $11,000. And then that's kind of moved up where the average farm put in or used 80,000 of bonus or section 179 this last year, and essentially 30,000 of bonus depreciation. Again, this is just kind of a percentage share of the assets. And so you can kind of look at other assets or on capital investment, they're 76%, less likely to use section 79, 179 or bonus depreciation on those. And that's probably makes sense. On big ticket items, you're more likely going to use the 179 depreciation. And then the financial data, one of the things we did is we wanted to calculate a working capital ratio, owner's equity percentage, probability of default. And so that's why we lost about 300, a little over 300 farms. This just kind of pictures the investment there. Again, the patterns are roughly the same, but you can see that those 416 farms that we have the financial data are just smaller in terms of they do less investment. This is the same type of thing where we're looking at the 743 versus the other. Probably the only difference there is the 416, the smaller farms probably use less bonus depreciation, especially kind of in 2019 and in 2020. It just doesn't follow the trend. But again, they're usually going to use up their 179 first and then move into the bonus depreciation. And so smaller farms, that doesn't make sense. One of the things we're able to do, and this is one of the things that Jenny and Beth and I are going to look at, is essentially we just ran net farm income on the investment in combines, tractors, and all assets. And so I need to put this in the Tobit, but it was getting towards the end. And so I just have an OLS here. And so I don't think it's going to change anything, but obviously there are quite a bit of zeros in this thing, in that people aren't buying combines and tractors every year. I'm less concerned maybe about all assets in terms of that's probably not going to be zero very often. But just on a 2 variable where essentially I have an intercept plus beta times net farm income is equal to the combine investment, the tractor investment, and then the all assets. What's interesting is essentially 4% of net farm income is spent on combines. 3.4% is spent on tractors, and all assets basically 23%. And so you can see that there's certainly some lumpiness, and it's much more static to make a farmer to move to replace a tractor quicker or a combine quicker than some of the other assets there with regards to that. You add those two up, and that would be for every dollar, 7 and 23. So you got about 16% there that is still out there. We ended up calculating a lot of these financial ratios, and we'll go through that pretty quickly. Here we estimated 5 models, 9 variations each. We ended up estimating a model on working capital, probability of default, capital debt repayment capacity, owner's equity percentage, working capital percent. And the way that we set these up, and I'm going to report the 4 in the purple, but essentially we just basically looked at can the cost basis of investment predict the working capital. One of the things we wanted to do, though, is obviously if you just do them in the same year, there's all kinds of simultaneity there. And so what we ended up doing is logging the cost basis 1, 2, and 3 years. And so does the investment from 3 years ago positively or negatively affect the working capital? Does the amount of bonus depreciation you took 2 years ago affect that? And so that's kind of how we've set these up, is again, just put one variable in each of the models with a 1, a 2, and a 3-year lag, basically saying that were prior decisions, did they negatively affect the financial ratios there? And so were these things causing farmers to do things to themselves that they probably would not want to do? And so we have these models. I'm only going to show you one, then I'm going to summarize everything. But essentially on capital investment here, essentially we had a 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year leg there. On the section 179, we had 1, 2, and 3 year leg. And then bonus depreciation, we had 1, 2, and 3. And what's kind of interesting in some of these, obviously, when we're using panel data, with 8 years of data, if you have one leg, you lose 416 observations. The 2 legs, you lose 832 observations. And I'm not going to do the math for the 3 year leg, but essentially that's why the observations are going down there. You do have an adjustable R square, or you do have the adjusted R squared. But again, in terms of looking at this, basically capital investment had no relationship to the working capital ratio. And so past capital investment did not increase or decrease. In terms of this is kind of interesting in that these signs are kind of opposite what you would expect. And so again, there's probably not, in terms of, there's lots of things there, but basically what you would be concerned about is that if they took a lot of 1679 depreciation in order to take advantage of the tax code, that would cause their working capital position to decrease 1, 2, or 3 years later. And so essentially here we're looking for a negative relationship that's statistically significant, saying, okay, farmers can't handle the use of section 179 depreciation. They're taking advantage of it and it's killing them 2 or 3 years after the investment. One of the things is you see kind of the unexpected sign that they're all positive, they're all statistically significant. And so from this perspective, it doesn't appear that previous tax policy is causing farmers to put themselves in a bad working capital position as we go through. And so again, I'm just going to do these in terms of capital investment. And so I'm just going to summarize these. It's the same type of regressions, but you don't want to see lots of tables. It's too close to the end of the day. And so if there's an arrow there, it's statistically significant, either positive or negative. If there's no arrow there, it is non-significant. And so essentially, I'm just putting the significant ratios there in the direction. And so looking at this, what this says is that if they made a lot of capital investment, it actually increased their capital debt repayment capacity. Again, this is a good sign as opposed to a bad sign in terms of if they were overestimating with regards to capital investment, that would cause that ratio to decrease 1, 2, or 3 years out. Owner's equity percentage, again, the owner's equity percentage is kind of the opposite of what you think. And so it's not getting them into debt situations. And so if they made a lot of capital investment, they're not using debt in order to drive that ratio the wrong direction. And so again, basically on capital investment, it basically seems that farmers are fairly shrewd with regards to this. On section 179, you have everything was statistically significant there. But again, everything there is in the direction that would say farmers are not being induced to make stupid investment decisions and killing their ratios 2 or 3 years down the road. And so again, what this indicates is that at least the farmers that we're working with are pretty shrewd business people. In fact, that they're just not, well, I can get a big deduction, so I'm going to go buy a bunch of stuff and not worry about how I can pay for it. And so that's kind of a good thing. Bonus depreciation, again, they're working in the direction opposite, which would cause financial difficulties if they're statistically significant, and then the others are not statistically significant. And so again, it is kind of interesting with regards to the fact that at least the group of farmers that we have here are realizing that, okay, I just can't buy equipment in order to take advantage of the tax law in terms of I gotta pay for it sometime. It has to make money in my operation. And so, from a congressional standpoint, if I had to recommend to policymakers, I would not be worried about the fact that these accelerated depreciation methods are causing financial difficulties for farmers down the road. You could argue maybe I should use a 4-year leg or a 5-year leg. Obviously, I can't use too many legs simply because I run out of observations, but it is there. So those are kind of the conclusions. I think that's it, but this is kind of a neat data set. And if people have interests, you could do a whole career on this simply because we have the placement date, we have the disposition date, and you could do all kinds of things with regards to what is the economic cycle doing with the economic replacement in terms of what is causing farmers to replace their assets and how much does that economic replacement decision change based on the financial conditions within there. And the other thing that's kind of interesting, that's pretty unique, and I don't know if Illinois, they don't do tax records, do they? And so do they have all the assets on a item by item basis?
I've never seen it, but we do tax work.
Okay, and so if you do tax, it's probably there someplace.
There's someplace, but it's not in a very accessible.
And this wasn't either. And so, but now we have it in an accessible framework. And so there's lots of opportunities to really look at that machinery investment decision. And I think it's kind of cool where you can break it down by asset line in terms of looking at, okay, combines, tractors, hay equipment, storage facilities in terms of we would have grain bin investments in terms of that's all there. And so with that, questions, Brad?
Alan, I was just mentioned grain storage. So combines and tractors aren't as big a share of that total as we sometimes think or read. What is the big share of that?
Good question. I'll have to investigate that in terms of.
Grain storage.
Yeah, the grain storage could be, again, there's a lot of implements. There's planters, there's sprayers, those types of things. And again, getting this master's student to graduate, it's like, well, let's just pick 2 investments and not go all of them.
So I do have a hypothetical.
Yep.
Tester. How much do they invest in the shop? And does that translate?
Shops, and the other thing would be interesting would be pickups for farm use in terms of, and not to pick on farmers, but you do see some new pickups if the supply chain is working when income is good. Yes.
So, what would be your recommendation on increasing the limits?
I haven't presented that there, but most of them don't hit the limits in terms of these. I think there was just very few farms that hit the limits. And I'm not sure that any of them hit the limits, both of bonus and section 179. And so, yeah, obviously there'd be some farmers out there that would want you to do that, but for most of these farms, they are not hitting the limits with regards to investment. And so, if they wanted to, you would make who just bought all the land in Montana, which individual? Oh, it was made the news, and it was South Dakota, Montana. Yeah, it was Bill Gates. And so if Bill Gates is getting in, he's going to run his own tractors and stuff like that. It's like, well, maybe you'd want to increase the limits for him, but my guess is most of society would say no in terms of with that. And so, but good question in terms of, and that's one of the things we can look at is, are they hitting those limits? And it's very, I would say probably about 2 or 3 farms hit the limit in a specific year. And so the limits, if you hear farm groups whining about limits, ignore them. That would be my view based on the information here.
We were talking about like the working capital ratio, but I mean, there is kind of a simultaneity on some of that? Are you taking working capital at end of year
I'm taking it 1 year out, 2 years out, 3 years out.
in the future, but okay, because you're taking the capital investment.
So I'm taking the capital investment for 21, and then I'm looking at the working capital ratio for 21 and using the capital investment for 20, 19, and 18. And so essentially, all of the investment or depreciation decisions are lagged. And so the years that I'm throwing out is when I use a 1 year lag, I'm throwing out 2021. When I use a 2 year lag, I'm throwing out 2021 and 2020. And so the thing is I think we have that timed right with regards to the fact that there shouldn't be any simultaneity. I thought about kind of dealing with simultaneity simply because a lot of investment is made kind of at the end of the year, but just to be safe, I didn't use
Because I
anything
think when you're.
that was
when you have a lot
contiguous.
of working capital, you might go out.
Yep.
The other thing, I thought, on one of them, I thought you did see where there was a decrease in the equity ratio from that.
I might have.
That very first one when you, no, that one. So capital investment did decrease on our equity percent, so increased in debt to asset.
So essentially, yeah, capital investment did cause you to have a little bit lower owner equity percentage ratio. And so that would mean your debt to asset would go up a little bit. So on the investment side, yeah, that one was,
Right about the capital.
yeah.
The better repayment capacity.
Mhm.
So they're effectively using capital investment.
At least in the US, sometimes we like to beat on farmers as not being astute business people. And maybe it's the individual running the equipment that isn't an astute business person, and the individual that often is doing the books is the spouse. They may be the ones that are keeping these individuals from green paint disease or red paint disease or blue paint disease with regards to that. So, any other questions? I don't know what time it is.
Could there be, would it be a lot of irrigation on this?
There would be irrigation equipment. And so to me, basically any depreciable item we have coded and broke out and so you could look at anyone, and that's where I'm saying in terms of this could be someone's career if they wanted to make it their career. It won't be my career. Anything else? If not, that will end the session. Hopefully, I don't know how many of the slides those were that were on there. We're able to see, but thanks.
And that worked perfect. That was a great presentation. I couldn't see all the slides, but it was great.
You have the inverse current ratio.
Yep.
When and why would you give the inverse of it?
Simply because some of them don't have any short-term liabilities.
Okay.
And so that pushes that thing to infinity.
No, there's zero.
Yep.
or-
Yeah, your
Okay.
denominator goes to zero, the ratio goes to infinity. And so if you flip it,
Okay.
if you flip it, it just solves any of those issues and that. Yep. Yeah, no, it's like a lot of times you assume that they have current liabilities, but there are some farmers that don't, everything's cash and so that would
Okay.
that would mess
makes
it up.
sense.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
And actually, I was.
Mark, if you want the slides, send me an email and I will attach them. I realize that I screwed it up, but if you would like the slides, just send me an email. And it's afeather@ksu.edu. afeather@ksu.edu.
That's in progress. I would. We have this work with, yeah, that is.